He was a brat, and he went to Fordham for 1 year, and then he got into University of Pennsylvania. I guess he had somebody to take the exams. No way. And he had somebody take his entrance exams? SATs or whatever. Yeah. Oh, Jesus. I even remember the name. Albert, I did his homework for him.
I'm highly educated. I went to the Wharton School of Finance.
I went to the Wharton School of Finance. I went to the Wharton School of Finance.
I went to the Wharton School of Finance. I was a very fine student.
I've also heard I was first in my class at the Wharton School of Finance. And I used to say, excuse me, I went to the Wharton School of Finance. I said, excuse me, does that mean we're not going to make things anymore?
Well, we all remember how Citizen Trump perpetuated the birther lie about President Obama. He also questioned President Obama's intelligence, telling the Associated Press that he heard that Obama was a terrible student and he should show his school records. A few days later, the headmaster at Mr. Trump's own high school got an order from his boss to find Trump's school records and help bury them.
I am providing the committee today with several documents, copies of letters I wrote at Mr. Trump's direction that threatened his high school, colleges, and the college board not to release his grades or SAT scores.
Donald Trump has spent decades saying he was at the very top of his class at Wharton, talking about himself like he was one of the greatest students the school had ever seen, saying professors noticed his brilliance right away and knew he stood out from everyone else. But then there's William T. Kelly, Trump's marketing professor at Wharton, a man who taught there for 31 years from 1951 to 1982 and saw thousands of students come through his classroom over the years.
Bragging in no shortage of degree about how smart he is and also his educational bona fides. They spoke to an admissions officer who was there at the time named James Nolan. He says the acceptance rate in 1966 was at 50%, and it was even higher for transfers like Donald Trump, who went to Fordham first. Nolan also told the Post he was not impressed with Trump's intellect. I certainly was not struck by any sense that I'm sitting before a genius, certainly not a super genius. It was not very difficult to get into Wharton.
And according to his friend Frank DePrima, Kelly repeated the exact same thing for 3 straight decades, from the 1970s all the way until he passed away in 2011. Every time Trump's name came up, Kelly would say Donald Trump was the dumbest goddamn student he ever had. Not one of the worst, the dumbest. And what makes that hit differently is that this wasn't something he blurted out once in a bad mood or during a moment of frustration. He said it for 30 years. At that point, it stopped sounding like anger and starts sounding like a judgment from a man who spent his life teaching marketing and business strategy to thousands of students, but remembered one in particular because the gap between that student's confidence and that student's understanding was so huge that it became the story he kept telling whenever somebody asked about the worst student he had ever taught.
By Trump saying it was the hardest school to get into, I wanted to see if that was true. It is not the hardest school to get into. This was the undergraduate school of finance at the University of Pennsylvania. At the time Trump went to University of Pennsylvania, the acceptance rate was more than 50%.
Stephen Colbert ended up finding the testimony, and it came from Frank DePrima, who had been Kelly's friend for decades and publicly repeated what Kelly had privately told him again and again over the years. And DePrima's account got attention from multiple outlets because it wasn't some vague story or random rumor floating around. The quote was very specific, the timeline was clear, and Kelly had supposedly been saying this long before Trump ever got involved in politics. That part matters because, according to the story, this wasn't coming from a political angle. It was being framed as a professor's professional opinion about a student who sat in his classroom back in the late 1960s.
What's different here is that Trump has said he's done so great. Hardest school to get into, super genius stuff, that he'd heard he was first in his class. None of that was correct. In fact, the dean's list of 56 top students does not include Trump's name.
Kelly didn't just throw out an insult and move on. According to the story, he explained exactly why he saw Trump that way. He told DePrima that Trump would walk into class acting like he already knew everything, like he had the answers before the discussion even started. He said Trump wasn't interested in learning ideas that challenged what he already believed, and while he could memorize enough information to get through exams, he struggled when it came to taking those ideas and applying them to real situations. Kelly also claimed that whenever he pushed back on Trump's reasoning in class, instead of really engaging with the question, Trump would dodge it or talk around it. What Kelly described wasn't just someone having trouble in school. He was talking about a student whose own confidence got in the way of actually learning, and after spending 31 years teaching thousands of people, he felt this was something different. To him, it was a very specific kind of limitation that happens when someone becomes convinced they're smarter than the material before they've even taken the time to understand it.
The article also points out that Trump was not one of the top honorees at graduation, and he wasn't even on the dean's list. Now, a year earlier, Trump, he had this to say about Obama.
He was a terrible student. Terrible. He went to Occidental. I heard he was a terrible student. Not like okay. I heard he was a bad student.
If you grew up in a time when a professor repeating the same opinion for 30 years actually meant something, when a teacher who had seen thousands of students remembered one as the worst and people saw that as a professional judgment instead of a personal attack, then you probably already understand the point Kelly was making. Some students struggle because they don't put in the effort, but some struggle because they convince themselves they already know everything before they've even learned it, and according to this story, Kelly believed Trump fell into that second category. Then the conversation shifts to Trump's academic record itself. When Philly Mag looked into his years at Wharton, they reported that Trump's name didn't appear on the dean's list in 1968, meaning he wasn't listed among the top academic performers that year. They also reported that his name didn't appear in the honors section of the 1968 graduation program, which would mean he didn't graduate with honors like cum laude, magna cum laude, or summa cum laude and wasn't in the highest academic tier. So when Trump says he was at the top of his class, while records are being pointed to on one side and a professor's long-standing opinion is being pointed to on the other, the argument being made here is that those claims don't all fit together at the same time.
Well, Donald Trump has said for years that he is the top student at Wharton. Whenever people have questioned his intellect, he's referred to getting a degree, that it was the hardest school to get into. So essentially I wanted to see if that was true and find out what exactly happened in getting into Wharton.
And if you haven't subscribed yet, hit the button. It takes like 2 seconds, and if you're already subscribed, you're literally the reason this keeps going. But here's the part this whole story keeps circling back to, the thing being presented as impossible to just brush aside. According to the account, Kelly didn't suddenly come up with this opinion after Trump became famous. He was supposedly saying it back in the 1970s when Trump was just a local real estate developer that hardly anyone outside New York knew about. He kept saying it through the 1980s and 1990s when Trump had become a celebrity but wasn't a political figure, and he was still saying it in the 2000s before there was any talk of a presidential run. The argument here is that when a professor spends 31 years teaching thousands of students and still remembers one person in that way, it suggests someone who wasn't just a little below average but someone who stood out so strongly that the memory stayed with him for the rest of his life. Kelly reportedly told Deprima that the issue wasn't intelligence in an IQ sense. He believed the bigger problem was confidence pushed so far that it blocked out correction, blocked out feedback, and made it hard to sit with the reality of not knowing something. And in business school, where the whole point is learning ideas and applying them to situations you've never seen before, the argument is that someone who believes they already have all the answers can hit a wall no matter how much information they memorize. The dean's list is being described as a published record, and the honors section of a graduation program as a documented academic threshold. So the point being made here is that public claims about being at the very top of the class are being measured against records and long-standing accounts that tell a different story. Subscribe to the America Insight News. We find the details people keep repeating, we look at the patterns, and we slow everything down.